All right, thanks for meeting us on this final meeting that we have today.
Well, the final meeting of the legislature, but all depending on what happens, maybe one more time in person, maybe. We'll talk about it.
That would be great. So, can we start with what's the status of our bill? You emailed me this morning or last night. I'm not sure what it was.
Well, the legislative process is very interesting and things change very rapidly. While it may seem slow, sometimes things happen very fast. And yesterday, late afternoon, early evening, the House of Representatives decided that they wanted to bring up for a final vote House Bill 1034, which is the House version of what we've been looking at of Cooter's bill from the Senate. So House Bill 1034 came up for a discussion on second reading and then to final passage last night, and your bill passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 63 to 35. It was a good debate, and if you get a chance, you can go and look into TVW's archives and pull the bill up and watch what went on. So that's really good news. We didn't know for a while whether or not the bill technically was still viable or alive because of the cutoff, but it was determined that it did have an impact on the final budget, so it was necessary to implement the budget, NTIB we call it, and they passed it. And they passed it over to the Senate. Now, today's the last day. Things are supposed to wrap up today because you can only have a 60-day session in an even-numbered year unless they decide to extend it for a variety of reasons. To be able to keep your bill alive past today is probably not one of the reasons the governor would call them back into a legislative session, to be honest with you. But it's still alive. And I talked to the sponsor of the bill from the House, Paul Harris, Representative Harris, and he said he's working it really hard to try to get the Senate to bring it up on the floor before they adjourn their final adjournment called sine die today. I went in to see Senator Cooter, and she was actually in her caucus, and I was not able to meet with her, but I met with a couple of the folks from the health department and whatnot that are supporting the bill, and they said there's some work behind the scenes to be able to get the bill that's in the Ways and Means Committee now. The House bill went to the Senate Ways and Means Committee, but it's already had a hearing with the Senate version, and they may procedurally be able to bring it out of the Ways and Means Committee without a hearing and put it on the floor for a final vote tonight, maybe. There's a lot of other bills they're trying to consider. They're still trying to finish their budgets before midnight tonight. So we'll see, but you're still alive. And that's really good that your issue is still before the legislature and they're considering it. With that, why don't I stop, and if there's any quick questions, and then I want to talk about what happens if the bill doesn't make it today and what are the options. Is that okay?
Yeah. Any questions that you guys have? Ryder? So we have some kind of questions about just how the legislature works in general with like citizens legislature things. Is that okay? There you go.
So I was wondering if you know, like, what do the senators do when they're not on like the year?
When they're not in Olympia?
Yeah.
Well, in the state of Washington, we have what's called a part-time legislature, which means the legislature doesn't meet every day for the whole year. It only meets for part of the year. And because it's not a full-time job, these people who are elected to represent you, who are in the Senate and the House, they have other jobs. They have other things that they do. Some of them are retired, and then this is their effort to be able to give back to their community. But a lot of them have jobs. In my previous life, when I was worked for the Boeing company as a lobbyist, we had, I don't know, about 7 different members of the legislature that worked for the Boeing company. So when the legislature was over, they went back to their regular jobs at the Boeing company. And I know some maybe work for a labor union and they'll go back. Senator Conway, that's what he does. He represents a labor union. So they could go back to their families if they don't work full-time, or they could go back to whatever they do in their regular life. Because it's a part-time legislature doesn't mean that everything finishes at the end of a legislative session, because they'll have committee meetings that will meet during the interim to get ready for next year. This year, all of the House members and half of the Senate members are going to be running for re-election. So they're going to get ready for their campaigns, and they're going to be out campaigning if they decide that they want to run again. Does that help answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Jacob? You can just stand.
I can see you.
So I'm Jacob, and I have like sort of two follow-up questions from that. One, doesn't that lead to conflict of interest? If you're also doing some other job, couldn't you try to pass laws that benefit that other job? And also, if they're only working part-time, doesn't that make it harder for lower class and working class people to become representatives? Because it's harder to work part-time if you are not in an affluent family or are not already affluent.
Yeah, those are two good questions, and hopefully I can remember both of them as I try to answer. I know for the representatives when they worked at the Boeing Company, while they were in the legislature, they still were considered employees of the Boeing Company, and so they got benefits, they got their vacation pay, and they also worked when they weren't in Olympia, even though it was during the session, like on weekends or whatnot. They'd go back to work and still receive sometimes their full pay from the Boeing Company, just depending on what they were doing. And we had an arrangement with the employees of the Boeing Company to where there was a kind of a sharing of their salary, whether or not it was the Boeing salary or the legislative salary. The other part of that is that there are some people who kind of take this as a full-time deal. Some states when you're elected, this is your job and you're a full-time employee of the state, but not in the state of Washington, because they've considered, the people so far have considered just having citizen legislators rather than full-time professional legislators. So what was the other part of the question?
Wouldn't this make it harder for lower class or working class people to join? Because it's hard to work, you need a full-time salary to continue making money, so it's hard to work part-time while still, if you're from a working class or a lower class family.
Yeah, the answer, the question's a good one, and the answer is maybe a little complicated. Some people feel that's their civic duty, and they are willing to give up pay in a full-time job to be able to do what they think is the right thing for their constituents, for their people, and they see it as a kind of passion to do this. Now, with some legislators who have been here a long time, they gather so much knowledge on some of these issues, whether it be transportation or the environment or whatnot, that they become very attractive to a future governor to maybe be appointed to be a head of an agency, which makes some pretty good salary. So they look at this as a career growth opportunity that they might not have otherwise to be able to be appointed into a really good paying position in state government. The other part of it is, because the legislators, I don't remember what the pay is, it's not a ton of money, but it's still $50-some thousand a year part-time with benefits. And some members of the legislature consider this their regular full-time job, and when they aren't doing this, then they're working in their community on behalf of their issues related to the legislature that they feel passionate about. So there's another way of looking at the question too, is that there are often a number of people who have a really good, well-paying job that the legislature is starting to take up so much time, they can't afford to be here because of the time. They make good money, they make a ton of money, but they have to leave the legislature because of the time it's taking up away from their full-time, good-paying job. So it kind of works on both ends of the spectrum. If you're not making a lot of money, it's tough to be able to live on a legislator's salary, but some people do it. but also for people that make quite a bit of money at a really good paying job to have the time to be able to devote to the legislature. And so oftentimes they'll quit to work full time at a good paying job. Any other questions?
Ela?
Yeah.
Hi, I was wondering, why do you think that this bipartisan bill hasn't been passed over 3 years?
Say that again. I'm sorry, I didn't hear it.
Yeah, I was wondering, why do you think this bipartisan bill hasn't been passed after 3 years?
Oh, there's a lot of answers for that. It might be bipartisan and it might have a lot of support, as you could see from the vote on the floor of the House, but there's a lot of people that are against this bill. The tobacco industry, which makes significant political contributions, is opposed to the bill. There are a number of folks in retail that feel that and you saw it in the testimony, that by raising the age will eliminate a lot of potential customers, and that people are going to go to the tribal reservations anyway and buy it if they're 18, 19, or 20 years of age. And so they don't want to lose the income to their corner grocery store or to their retail store somewhere, because there is a fairly significant amount of sales to people between the ages of 18 and 21 years of age. So there's a lot of people that are working hard against this bill. But your question really leads to something that I want to talk about, maybe not this very second. I want to go through the questions, but why do things not pass when they first are introduced, and why sometimes does it take a long time for issues to kind of mature and to be able to get the votes, whether it's bipartisan or not? But let's go on to another question, then I want to come back to it and talk a little bit more about it.
Oliver?
So so we have an upcoming test on everything that we've learned in our capital classroom and the bills. So I want to ask you, do you think that the legislative system is effective in making change?
Do we think the legislative system is effective when it comes to change? Was that the question?
Yeah.
Yes.
It kind of gets up into the question that was asked just before you, and what are the other alternatives if we don't use this kind of system, or we don't use this approach to things? When you use the words effective or efficient, I would like to say that there's a number of places around the world with dictators who deal with efficiency all the time. They just don't allow for any debate or any discussion. They get to decide what the final answer is, and they will eliminate any opposition or opposing viewpoint to that issue. Now, that's efficient, but does that necessarily make it, from our perspective, fair or right, or the ability for a minority voice to be heard in the decision-making process? I know what you're trying to get at is that it's frustrating when legislation is introduced that seems to you and to me so logical that why wouldn't a normal, rational, sane person want to go ahead and say, yeah, this should be the policy. But in the system that our forefathers kind of developed, and that was to have a majority, but as well as a minority opportunity to discuss issues and try to come to a consensus, if at all possible, on problem solving. So it doesn't mean that our democratic process is pretty sometimes, because you can get into some very deep philosophical arguments on issues and what direction you want to take. But at least it's a system that's been developed that attempts to give a voice to the minority to help make decisions that ultimately become policy. I made a decision a long time ago when I was really starting my career as to whether or not I knew I wanted to be in this kind of business, but where should I go and spend my time? Should I go to Washington, D.C., where you're rubbing elbows with the Congress of the United States and with the president and the executive agencies, and there's a lot of attractiveness to try to do that, to be in the hub of the center of democracy in our world. or to work more on the state and the local level to try to affect change that I thought was important. And I chose working at the state and local level because I think you can get decisions made quicker and faster, and you can see more progress when you deal with things at the local, whether it be a city or a county or at the state, than you would in Washington, D.C. But that was a decision that I made at the time, and I've done some work in Washington, D.C., and I've done some work outside the U.S. as well. But speed is a relative thing. You know, we've been a country for a long, long time, and while it may have seemed really slow to evolve to say something like equality for everyone and the ability for, say, women to have the right to vote, or non-discrimination in employment, those things took decades, took a century or more to get to. So in the grand scheme of the length of time going back to the Roman Empire, that seems pretty quick, but it seems really slow to us. And I think it really seems slow when you can't get a majority of the members of the legislature to get to the governor a simple little thing like moving the age of being able to purchase tobacco and vaping products from 18 to 21 years of age. But time is relative, and sometimes it takes a long time and sometimes not quite as long to get things done. I look at the things I would have been involved with in Washington, D.C., and sometimes it takes your whole career just to get one or two things done, if at all. So I really like the fact that sometimes it takes 5 to 7 or 10 years to be able to get one thing done at the state or the local level if you've got a really good idea. I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute, but I'm going to see if there's any questions off of that thought or anything else you have.
I think we have just kind of one more main question. Ben?
Are there any other bills in the Senate that they're considering today?
The list that I looked at earlier, they just passed the supplemental transportation budget that goes over to the House. And on the Senate calendar, there's probably about 30 or 35 bills still to be dealt with. And when I left to come over here to be with you, they were in caucus meeting on which bills they want to have come up next, and also to have a little bit of lunch, because they're planning on working through the afternoon into the evening. And I would be surprised if they got out of here and sine died with the final gavel much before about 10 o'clock tonight. So they're going to be working all day. There's a lot of bills. You can go through bills fairly quickly, but if there's any controversy to them, it's going to take a while. And if you're asking the question, is there any chance that your legislation will be able to make it? I'm a lobbyist, and I always believe there's a chance that your stuff is going to make it until they bang that final gavel. So I'm an optimist. But I'll let you know.
And then it would go to the governor's desk after that.
It would go to the governor's desk, and then the job would be for, under my direction, for you all to probably write a letter, send an email, or to somehow communicate with the governor's office that this is a really important piece of legislation and that you would ask him to sign it. And we can certainly talk about that there. I can talk with Corey and kind of give you some instructions to do it if we're not going to be able to have another video conference like this. But yep, that's the next step, is to convince the governor, and he would have up to 20 days to make a decision as to whether or not he would sign or veto or not sign the bill. And if he doesn't sign it, then it would go into effect without his signature.
Do we have any more questions, Andrew?
What are the pros and cons of having a citizen legislator?
I talked about some of those already, but what would be some of the cons of having this citizens legislator? I think we talked about some of the pros.
Say it again. I need to understand the question. The pros and cons of?
Well, of this part-time legislature.
Oh, I see.
And kind of to follow up on Jacob's question that he had earlier, which would be, is there a conflict of interest?
Yes.
If you are a member of a labor union, if you work for a labor union and you're a legislator, how does that play out? in your experience?
Yes, there are rules that relate to conflict of interest, and if there's an issue that would come up before the legislature that you would have a direct, I think, monetary benefit to, you would have to, or it would be necessary for you to announce this to the body that you would have to, what they call recuse, or allow yourself to not have to take the vote. In all of my years of experience, I've almost never seen anyone do it in this state. It's sometimes up to the opposition to say, excuse me, but why is Representative so-and-so able to vote on this bill, because they have a huge conflict, but it's almost never dealt with. In comparison to the state, in the state of Oregon, I've seen it happen all the time. When I used to do a lot of work down there for the Boeing company in the state legislature, there were people standing up all the time saying, I'm sorry, but I can't vote on this issue because I have a direct benefit to it. I think it's an area that the citizenry needs to take a look at a little bit more as to what kind of conflicts may exist. I know for the Boeing company, I used to be very strict when I would talk to the legislators that worked for the Boeing company. And I would let them know what the Boeing company's agenda was, their legislative agenda, but I would never, ever, ever lobby them on it, because I felt personally, to me, that it was a conflict in trying to force them to take a vote on something that the Boeing company had a benefit on. There were some legislators who weren't happy with that. They really wanted to know what the Boeing company's position was, and I would tell them if they asked me, but I did not make it an issue. But it's up to the individual to really recuse themselves or not when it comes to issues. On the other hand, it's really important to have a lot of different people in the legislature with lots of different backgrounds to be able to get a flavor, or at least a sense of how this legislation works or doesn't work. And with their experience will help in the crafting of something that technically should work better than if you had 98 members of the House of Representatives who knew nothing about the issue trying to make policy decisions on it. So it kind of goes both ways, but it's a valuable question. It's a good question, and there's value to trying to determine whether there's conflict or not. The cons to having a full-time legislature or a part-time legislature, you get a more experienced maybe body, but they become the professionals and become more embedded. When you have the citizen legislature, you have a better choice of being able to get people with a variety of backgrounds rather than wanting the legislature to be their employer full-time. It used to be when I first came here that the legislature met every other year. It didn't meet every year like it does now. That was changed by a citizens initiative in 1979 because at least at that time, they felt that having a part-time legislature in the even and odd years before the next election was really important to be able to get policy, to get fiscal issues correct that they had decided the year before. But there has not been a big push for a full-time legislature, because to get really good qualified people, you probably have to boost the salaries fairly substantial to get good quality people to be able to afford to run, to be able to take the position.
I think that kind of wraps up our questions so far. What's our next step on the bill here, and what they can do to make it go forth?
Well, we have 12 hours and no more than 12 hours to go, because the legislature has to finish by midnight tonight. Or if they haven't finished their major work, then the governor would call them back in probably by tomorrow. If that happens, then the legislation, if it hadn't passed to go to the governor, could technically be resurrected and brought up for action whenever the legislature comes back. But I am going to guess that that's not going to happen, that they will finish. They want to get out of here. The members of the legislature want to get out of here. They had a long, super long session last year. Their families aren't happy with them taking this much time, even this year, to come and work on the issues that they have. So they're tired. They want to get out of here. And they can't start collecting campaign contributions until they finish with the legislature. There's a a block on their ability to start their campaigns. And for some of these folks, they're going to have some very tough races, and so they're going to want to start campaigning as soon as they can, or at least raising money to be able to support their campaign. So they're going to be out of here. So what happens to the legislations? Pass the House with a big vote. It's over in the Senate Ways and Means Committee. The Senate Ways and Means Committee has already heard the Senate version, so they already know what to do. And procedurally, and when I say procedurally, someone would have to step up on the floor and say, Mr. President, I move that House Bill 1054 be relieved, that the Ways and Means Committee be relieved of House Bill 1054, and that it be placed on today's second reading calendar. That takes, I think, a super majority, or at least 60% of the members to be able to move on it. I'm not entirely sure, and some people are checking on that. But it's entirely possible that the bill could be pulled from Ways and Means, put on the floor, and then brought up for a final vote tonight before midnight. And that's what I'm watching for. That's what I'm working with the Attorney General's office and some of the other health department lobbyists to be able to see if they can move this issue. I will be very honest as your lobbyist here that that's going to be really hard to do, but not impossible. And we've done things like this in the past, and so we're going to use our expertise to do it. I have volunteered to go in and talk to key staff people and a couple of the attorneys that work with the lieutenant governor to see if there's a way that we can do this and to get the bill before the members to vote on. And once it comes up on the floor, it's got plenty of votes to pass. So I'm not too worried about it. It's right now, it's just the procedural move to get it from committee onto the floor. And I promise you, I will give a report. I'll send a report back to Corey and let you know exactly what happened. Even if it's after midnight tonight, I will send something tomorrow morning for at least distribution to let you know what happened. Okay?
Chelsea?
What is the state on the amendments that were proposed with the changing it from 18 and from 21 to 19, or the one where it's like a step system of going from 18 to 19 to 21?
It's going to be 18 to 21, and it's not going to be phased in, I don't believe. I don't think that's what they ended up adopting. I'll be honest with you, I didn't really read the bill. I just wanted the the bill to be able to move from the House to the Senate. And I know that the prime sponsor wasn't going to let something happen that we all weren't going to like. So I think it's just the strict 18 to 21. There may have been a couple other things in there, but you may want to look it up and see if you go and check 1054 and what the latest version was that passed the House. It'll tell you.
The only amendment that passed was to have the government be able to talk to tribal governments to try to get them to change their laws as well.
Okay, that's what I was assuming. And they may or may not want to do it, but if the bill passes and that attempt is made, I would argue that might be a fun thing for some of you to maybe help with, to be able to talk to, or at least to be in a position to help write a letter or something asking the tribal governments or your counterparts at some of the schools on reservations to be able to talk to them about the need to do this, because you're in a much better position than anyone else to influence tribes on this, in my opinion.
Jacob?
What how large of an impact do large companies and money have in the process of passing bills? And what large companies or mass amounts of money are influencing this bill on either side?
Well, I haven't taken a look at the Public Disclosure Commission and the lobbyists that are engaged in this, but I would guess that Altria would be one of the companies, and they have spent a lot of money over the last several years. They're one of the big tobacco companies spending money. So that would be one. But on the other hand, you've got people like you who you don't have money, but you have a tremendous voice, and people listen to you because you're the most affected by it. To ask someone about money and influence, I worked for the Boeing Company for a lot of years, and I never saw that the money that the Boeing Company used in campaign contributions influenced anyone. but it did give us the ability to talk to legislators about our issues. We have about 15 seconds left, and I want to tell you, I have really, really enjoyed working with you all, and I hope that you've learned a few things from me, and I am certainly open to any other emails or any other inquiries you may have through Corey if you'd like to do that. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Well, and thank you. And we have one spokesperson. We had more, but we were running out of time. So we have one spokesperson who has to say something in our last few seconds. So take a step in so we can see you. There you go.
Hi. I really wanted to appreciate how much time you took to explain to us how a bill passes and like the whole process, and bring us along with a real life bill, which for me is still surreal that we're making an impact in real life and not just in a simulation. So I wanted to thank you for that. Thank
you very much. You guys make the difference, and if you keep at it, you can make an even bigger difference as you mature through your life. This is a really important part of our democracy, and if we lose it, we lose everything. Thank you very much. I really have enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll talk again soon. Thanks a lot.
Sounds good. I'll keep you posted.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks. Bye.